and welcome to the School Leadership Show. I am Jen David Lang, and unfortunately, my co-host Mike Dowdy couldn't join us for this conversation. We will miss him, but I am very excited to introduce you to our guest, Dr. Michelle Borba, the author of the book Thrivers: The Surprising Reasons Why Some Kids Struggle and Others Shine. And this is the book I chose for the main idea this month. Dr. Borba is an educational psychologist, author, and parenting expert. She's written over 20 books and has worked with everyone from Harvard to Sesame Street. I love that span. And she's internationally mostly about the power of character skills and character education, if I have that right. And I chose to feature her work in the main idea because I really believe it has profound implications for us in the field of education right now. So, for a long time in schools, we've assumed that the kids with the strong grades and the strong test scores, they were set for success, right? Pretty straightforward. Aren't we working in schools in order to support students to achieve good grades and test scores? But these two areas, she has found, are not what are the true markers of success today in the 21st century. So welcome to the show, Michelle. I took show and Michelle. Welcome to the show. And can you talk a little bit about the premise of your book, Thrivers, and what led you to write it?
Oh, Jen, we are on exactly the same page together. I started this process. I'm an educator from way back. My father was a superintendent. My mother was a kindergarten teacher. I married an administrator. And we all began to see this change, a slow, gradual change where, the kids were getting smarter, but they weren't prepared for life. And then depression set in. 1 in 5 American kids was going to suffer from some kind of a mental health disorder. And I started to relook at all of the stats and see we had something wrong. It's not the GPA and the test score that's really going to help our kids. They need a different skill set. Not that we don't want them to be smart, but we also want them to be prepared. And that's what Thrivers did. It was absolutely amazingly fascinating journey of 10 years of figuring out why some kids do struggle and others thrive. And I began to see it was a combination of learned character strengths. And those character strengths are made up of skills. And the good news is it's not another program. It's not another fancy tutor. We can do this by weaving it into what we're already doing and bounce back a generation of kids who are going to be able to thrive.
That's great. That's interesting news for those of us in the education world to hear. So it's not the GPA, it's not the test scores. Are you suggesting that the GPA and the test scores might be driving the increase in mental health issues such as anxiety and depression?
Jen, thank you for that question, because probably the most interesting part of my work is I get to do focus groups with teens. And if you really want an answer to a problem, ask a kid. Almost every one of them said, we just don't have balance anymore. We're so worried about failing our parents. We're so worried about the grade that we don't have what we need in order to just flourish. And what they said was thrive. So I think that's one piece of it. They're worried desperately about us. Their focusing abilities are low. We know that. We know that they are more disengaged. We know their behavior problems are going up. And those are all indicators that when you're frustrated and anxious, those are typical issues. So it just means even more so, let's dig into what do they need, and let's look at some simple ways to maximize the change so that we all know we've got this and we can do it.
I want to stay for a moment on your research, these focus groups that you used, because I think one of the wonderful things about your book is that you included the words of actual kids themselves, and you're sort of providing a window into their world for those of us in education and those of us who are leaders, maybe district leaders, who are far away from being kids and growing up at this time. So, I pulled some of the quotes from your book so that our listeners can hear what the kids themselves are saying. One student said, "We're being raised just to be products, so we all feel empty." Another one said, "It's like we're being produced to be test takers. We're missing the pieces on how to be people." Another one said, "We may look good on the outside, but we're not so good on the inside. We're kind of lost." So these are pretty powerful comments from kids these days. Did you focus exclusively on teenagers, or what's the range of child or teen that you focused on?
What I wanted to do was get a diverse group of students. So the first thing was they were across the board from west to east, from north to south. They were usually middle school and high school students, and the counselors would give me access to the students. I'd do an hour focus group with 15 or so kids that usually had a pulse on what was going on, and a pulse on themselves, or a pulse also on their friends. They opened up like you wouldn't believe, and they were heart-wrenching at the end, because no matter where I went, rural, urban, suburban, affluent, or very impoverished kids, they almost all had the same things. They were feeling like they were ill-equipped. And as one kid said, I just don't have balance in my life anymore. I think it was so much going on. And they realized that they were hurting, but didn't know what to do about it.
I'm glad you brought up the diversity of experiences, because your book opens up with a story of Eva, who lives in an affluent area near Newport Beach, California, and she has to wake up 4 a.m. every day to get to a 5 a.m. swim practice, as an example of the type of striving that you're talking about in the book.
Yes.
So did you see all this striving for better grades, better sports performance, equally affected students from all background, or did you see it more tipped toward those who are more well off?
The fascinating thing is I began to see a trend that was the more affluent, the higher the depression score. And some of the other work is coming through saying it. It doesn't mean that it's not impacting all children, but we do know that kids who have agency, or a feeling of I got this, or they've got either a people in their lives, or protective buffers in their lives, or a protective place in their lives, are more likely to be resilient. Fascinating research that I was uncovering way back from my own ed psych days from 40 years ago, that looked at kids from homelessness and poverty situations, war zones, and that agency was the key. I think a helicopter generation has taken that down 5 levels. And so the child doesn't have that autonomy and agency that they so desperately need. And I think it's spiraling over, and we're impacting all of their mental health and well-being as a result.
Yeah, agency is definitely something educators are interested in building in kids.
Yeah.
You were very successful in getting the kids to open up to you. Would you have any advice for educators about a
Yes.
question that they should have in their back pocket that they could ask their students when they're, seeing them one-on-one in the hallway or in the cafeteria, that might help them open up to the teacher or the administrator?
They told me what they needed. The first thing is trust. They needed to know who I was and what I was going to do with these comments. So I let them know. The second thing is I always gave them the option to be anonymous. They always had index cards in front of them. If you have another idea that you'd like to write down, you never have to write your name down, but please let us know. The third thing that really seemed to help that they opened up for is your comments can be ones that are ones that you want to share, or you think your peers want to share. So anytime they opened their hearts up or said, voice their opinions, it was always, I don't know if that's what the kid is saying or his friends are saying. As a result, they felt far more comfortable. I'd suggest every educational leader take groups of kids to lunch, or take groups of kids just around a table, and different kids, not just the student council. These were kids who had a clear voice, who had opinions, and were going to be ones who wanted to share, and they always did. I just never left a group not feeling my heart pitter-pattering, going, there's hope if someone listens to kids.
I love that. I'm always telling kids, don't worry alone. So I think that this is a way to share those worries. And I particularly like the cloak of, I have a friend who, doesn't have to be about you. It could be about other kids, other friends.
Yeah, we need to hear them. And voice is part of agency. So it just fits in right into the model.
Yeah, probably even just the act of listening does a small piece as well. Do you recommend, so you interviewed middle and high school students. Do you think that leaders of schools, elementary kids should be listening to this? Is this a concern in upper elementary grades? Does it start as early as then?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can ask anyone. The key is the questions. I was asking some pretty high level questions about depression and anxiety. And I knew that when I was following the track of who were the kids who were going to be most impacted, it was obviously middle school and high school kids. But I think we need to get a range of what works at your school. Of all the SEL programs, what's the ones that you think that you're going to use that program again or that skill again? How would you like it to be taught? What is missing that you think that needs to be part of the agenda? Those were really helpful because what I'd also do is get a huge easel pad in front of me and start writing down the skills. And almost always the same skills came up over and over again. Time management. I don't know how to focus like I used to. I can't read my friends like I used to anymore. That was from looking down, not up. I'm worried about perfectionism. What do I do to be able to bounce back? The thoughts in my head are so negative. What do I do? The more you hear the same things coming up over and over again, you begin to recognize those are the skill sets the kids are needing and they're asking for so they can be more proactive and being able to move forward.
I like two things that you said here. One, asking students about the SEL programs in their school. We sometimes forget as educators when we're evaluating the effectiveness of something to
Mhm.
go to the students themselves, right? So that's a good reminder there. And then I really like that rather than sitting with a clipboard or a laptop, that you had an open easel and you're publicly showing kids that you are listening to them and you're writing down their thoughts. That must be incredibly validating for them as well.
I think it is because so many of them stopped afterwards and said, "Thank you for listening," which
Mm,
was, heart-wrenching again. But the
yeah.
fascinating thing is, Jen, there were some commonalities that kept coming up that I just want to mention to you.
Yeah.
Many of the kids said we're teaching too many skills. You're better
Mm,
off if you teach us one or two or three, because we got to practice those things. You don't learn them in the health unit, which was like
yeah.
quote unquote from a kid, and they're right on the mark. We
Yes.
have to choose what works for us.
Yeah.
Mindfulness works for some kids, meditation works for others. Give us a range of things and let us choose. But
Mm,
then we should practice it over and over again at the same time each day. I think one of the most profound things I've seen is the concept of quiet time, where the San Francisco schools were doing it, the Oakland schools were doing it, and they shaved off just a couple of minutes out of each class day and made sure that everybody was practicing the same skill the first minute or first 5 minutes of every school day. That's how they reaped the results
mm,
because everyone was practicing. Now there's no excuses. I can't do it now because I'm teaching that class, or I can't do it now that I'm teaching that class. But if you carved it out so that there's a little bit off of each, also that what they also did was carve off of their lunchtime. What they now have is a built-in time frame where they can do the same thing. They went and identified the skill their kids needed based on the behavior referrals. What do our kids need? Not the school next door. What do our kids need that we're seeing a constant new trend? And then they found they didn't have to go hire somebody or get a new program, somebody who was already trained in how do you do, for instance, when they discovered 1-2 breathing was really critical and the kids didn't have any stress reducers. They found that one counselor. She then videoed herself, put it on a flash drive, gave each teacher who still wanted the same lesson to be able to use it if they didn't feel comfortable doing it. And when the kids got comfortable enough doing it themselves, they videoed the kids. So it was part of their homework, go home and train the parents. So it was like everybody's getting it. I
yeah.
think that's one of the best things. It's one skill or two or three skills. In fact, one of the best things I've ever seen is over 500,000 people. Can you imagine this one? Were analyzed, excuse me, over 50,000 people were analyzed for can we help them reduce their mental health problems or increase their mental health so their well-being is intact, or if they have any kind of a physical challenge, can we still make a difference? What they
Mm,
then did is look at those 50,000 and look at the 400 studies they were involved in, and they found one thing, and this is the eye opener, I think, for schools. The
yeah.
first thing they found is that when we teach too much, it backfires
Mm,
because we never get the child to be able to do it, transfer it so they do it out on the playground, on the bus, out at home
yes.
without us. That's a real thing of a skill. And the
Yes.
second thing they found is that they really need to practice the skill 1 to 5 minutes a day, but do
Mhm.
the same thing. Don't skip any more than one day, but keep
Right.
doing the same thing and then find what works for the child. It's not just the one thing. Maybe there's two more things, like the kid wants to do a nature walk, or the kid really helps him if he writes all his assignments down. What works for the child and what you've got then is a lifelong skill that he's going to use forever without us.
Yeah, and I want to add one other thing to the focus on one skill. It doesn't just benefit the students, but for the teachers, right? When you come
Uh-huh.
in with a whole new program and here's 10 new things you need to do and, scattered throughout the day. But I think to focus on one thing at a time is helpful for teachers who are already working very hard. And also, the school-wide approach that you talked about of everybody doing it at the same time, that's something that our listeners who are school and district leaders can go with and run with and implement in their schools.
Well, and Jen, there's an old caveat there. Remember, the best way to learn a skill is by teaching it to someone else.
Yes.
So this was the buy-in I've seen in some of the best schools have now become what's called a thriver school. They've adopted the book and want to use the 7 strengths. But what they do is that they come up with one skill and they have the kids be the teachers. In fact, one of the most amazing schools at Temecula has thriver squads. Thriver squads once a week. This is your K-5. They meet at the lunchtime with a counselor and
Yeah.
they record a skill. And then
Ah,
that skill is showed in each classroom. I've never seen so much engaged kids because they were looking up at their peers teaching them a skill.
well, you're dropping a lot of great ideas. I want to zoom back for a moment for our listeners so that we can tell them sort of what we're talking about and the structure of your book. But yeah, one of the things I really appreciate is that instead of you and your book wallowing in the ills of growing up today, you really present an antidote, right, to this toxic striving in the form of 7 character skills that kids, and it's skills, right, not traits. Kids don't have to be born with them. That are the real markers of success, and that these are what we should be focusing on as educators and as parents and caregivers. So the book has 7 of these character skills and a chapter on each. And I also will be sending out through the main idea a 1-page overview of the 7 so that you could look at them as a school leader with your staff. You could even take it out and make copies for a parent coffee in the morning or evening. But the 7 character skills that Dr. Borba introduces are self-confidence, empathy, self-control, integrity, curiosity, perseverance, and optimism. So out of those 7, which 7 of which I'm sure no educator is unfamiliar with, could you introduce us to 1 or 2 that you might think would either be more foundational or where educators might start, especially since you're a proponent of starting small?
Mhm. When I look at that, the first thing I did, just so that you see there's a little backstory, each
Yeah.
one of those 7 had to be teachable. Each one of those 7 had to be highly related to resilience, but also peak performance, because as teachers, we don't have time to stop teaching. So it's weaving in to what we're already doing. I'd say one of them that is really core and critical is the first one, self-confidence. You can do those in any order. But what I find is that many children who don't have that balance in their lives, when they tell me that, are feeling very low in confidence. So every other one of those 7 is going to tank as a result. And what I discovered that it was like a pit that went through my heart was that 77% of the time today's parents focus on their kids' weakness, not their strengths, because they're so worried about he's going to fail or he's not going to get the grade. So I think one of the most glorious things I've seen is a revamp of strength-based teaching, where it doesn't mean you're going to not stop helping the kid if they're struggling. But one of the greatest ideas was a biology teacher who said, I've got a 5x8 card, and what I do is just every day I take roll on it, 1 card per child. It takes me a long time, but every time I discover a strength, I write it on the kid's index card. Now, how
Mm.
wonderful is that? You figure out their learning style. They figure out he's in a band after school. You figure out that he really likes to be with groups of kids as opposed to by himself. Another school, Murray Elementary, what they did is when they heard that idea, said, Why aren't we doing that? What they did is they not only got a card for each child, they started duplicating the cards. So every next year's teacher had a set of those cards. So they didn't have to start all over again. They were starting with the strength. Digital portfolios where the child begins to copy not your best work, but what gives you the passion or the purpose or the drive, and write it down that way. I love the excessive, just the walls, that is the assessment walls for strength walls in some high schools or middle schools or elementary schools, where you put a post-it across a bulletin board, one post-it per child. You alphabetize the post-its. If you want to, you can put a photo of the child. And then for the next couple of weeks, you walk by it, and every time you look at the kids you're worried about, put a check mark if you know something positive about the child.
Hmm.
And what you begin to see is who's missing, who doesn't have any check marks on. And so many staff members are then zeroing in on, well, there's who we're missing, the kids who don't have the check marks. We got to find out more about that child. Simple little rituals in a school. Educator leaders are brilliant at that, but you find what works for you and you keep doing it, or come up with your staff saying, here's another idea, and what'll happen, it'll flip it. So you begin to see more of the strengths for the child as opposed to their deficits.
I love all of this, and I'm definitely glad you started with self-confidence, because it seems like from the examples you described, there will be a lot of ripple effects. So if you're trying to build a student's self-confidence, then you as the teacher, you have to have high expectations for the student. And so there's been a lot of research connecting the expectations that teachers hold for their students and how the students perform. So, you can't build a child's self-confidence if you don't believe in the child.
Exactly. And even a post-it note is the best things going in your pocket. You don't have to say it out loud, but every once in a while, just the 10-second or the 5-second, write down it and saying, hey, I just discovered you're artistic, or thank you for hanging in there, and given the actual feedback, it just quadruples that inside and outside for a child. That's just a glorious concept. But the other thing I've seen is educational leaders doing something. Oh, this is so brilliant. What they do is that they choose one of the 7 once a month. Maybe it's a book talk, or maybe they're doing it a little bit more of a discussion during their teacher training sessions or their PD days. But they're asking the staff members to start with themselves. So what one principal did is ask each staff member to make a PowerPoint presentation of your own personal strengths, then put it up on the board. And it may not have anything to do with what you see in the classroom, but I love photography, or I love art, or I love travel. It started connecting all the staff members. I didn't know you love that. Well, no wonder you're so good at those bulletin boards. Or, hey, can you help me do this? It began to be the way to get just the staff members to open up and understand how strengths can be glorious for them as well as their students.
Well, and the second part that I was going to say is that if you are a teacher who's doing one of these activities, like, writing down on an index card the kids' strengths, and you're including examples like being artistic or playing the tuba or whatever, you have to know them to do that. In the same way, like the teachers, you said, they have to know each other. So that's also relationship building, which we know is very powerful in the classroom.
Well, the other thing you're doing is you're giving the child an alternative mirror. You're showing the child, here's something I believe in you. I haven't stopped believing you. I see the positive in you, because so many kids tell me they just don't see any positive about themselves. And that's what self-confidence can do. It's like the starter point to it. And then how do we get that information to the parents? We sometimes forget that those parents are really out of tools right now and may not be seeing the positives in their child. That can be a glorious concept of just a discussion, or pick up the phone. Hey, I just discovered something else about your cool kid, and here's what I just.
Well, and it also broadens it from, it's not just the 98 and the A+, right? That shows that you have strengths, but you're mentioning other areas as well. So no, that's great. And, I want listeners to know, listening to all these very concrete ideas that Michelle has been sharing, she also, at the end of each chapter, She has suggestions not only on how to teach each of these character strengths, but also age by age ideas from toddlers to tweens and olders for how you can teach them and model them and incorporate them. And like she said, it's not buying some fancy, expensive program. It's about incorporating it into what you already do. So yeah, I don't know if I don't want to take too much of your time, but is there one other character strength that you would suggest?
Well, I guess I'm really worried about optimism and hope for a kid. And that is if you were, I mean, we got to get into the shoes of our students these days. If you were a student and all you saw was the doom and gloom of the world, how'd you feel about it? I think some of the best research right now is saying that that mean world syndrome George Gerber came up with years ago is really impacting our students. And after a while, it's kind of like raising the white flag. What's the point? I think one of the most brilliant things I saw was a group of kids from Long Island, high school kids. Oh, Jen, they said that that they were really worried about the world. They were really worried about their younger brothers and sisters. That's all they saw was climate change, school shootings, hate. It's after a while, it really gets to you. They said, but that's okay. We solved it. I said, you solved it. What did you do? We convinced the superintendent to buy a huge plasma TV. I said, and what are you seeing on the plasma TV? He said, don't worry about it. We're seeing good news. Every day when we walk in, and I literally saw it, kids walking in from outside looking just so, kind of depressed with their arms around each other, kind of straggling down. They walked in and the first thing they did was look up, saw the plasma TV, and it was real images about real kids doing good things. And I'm telling you, it just broke me into I had to go to a crying jag because all the kids started to look up, put their arms around each other. These are teens, like 17 years old, putting their arms around each other saying, we got this, because they were seeing the good in the world. And I think we need to do that a lot more.
I like that you chose the optimism because that might be the one of the 7 that someone would most say, well, isn't that just an inborn trait, right? Either you're an optimistic kind of person or you're not, but you've shown in the book that there are ways to teach it. Do you see, what would you recommend? Let's say a school does want to focus on optimism for a month. Would you recommend that teachers infuse the teaching of optimism into math, biology, and Spanish, or do you see it that it would work better as a separate advisory or homeroom type of lesson?
Well, it certainly could be advisory and homeroom, but one of the things that I think we overlook is how we can weave it in. For instance, as you're talking about your health units or your science units, look for people who demonstrate optimism. The best scientists, how they keep going. I mean, I think one of the most optimistic concepts I've seen is Apollo 13, that clip of that shows you got to put a round hole in a square peg. It's just amazing what you can do to show clips of just a minute or 30 seconds and weave them in. An English teacher, it's finding children's novels, or the new work is now saying that when we give kids just books about real kids who can bounce back, wherever those books are, you can really make a difference in a child's life. I think kids need to see that there's hope, but they also need to see there's proof. So it doesn't have to be long. It just can be, here's 30 seconds and here's one more person who demonstrates optimism. And here's how it worked in science or whatever the subject is. And it weaved in PE. I'm seeing coaches do this. It's wonderful on getting ready for the Olympics. And here's what they're doing to help optimistic thinkers be able to get those gold medals. So kids see the value of it. By the way, there's fabulous new research saying that if you can counter the pessimism and the negative thinking at age 7, you can already spiral that kid so he's less likely to be depressed at age 13, 14, and 15. There's too much research that says we got this, but sometimes we make it too hard. Find the way you can weave it in and go for it there, and kids will remember you and they'll remember the concept.
That's great. Yeah, and I still think that one of the best ways, because teachers are already role models for students, just simply modeling it, even if it's not
Yes.
connected directly to, you could be a calculus teacher and you could say, this is my journal. Every night I write, 3 positive things that happened today to boost my optimism. But I think teachers are very powerful role models, as do I think principals are very powerful role models for their staff and their students.
Listen, I think educators are the best hope we've got. They would really make such a difference. Examples, experiences, expectations. We weave those things up and recognize we do make a difference. Listen, I became a first grade teacher way back when because of Mrs. Fredrickson. She always stood at the door every single day with the easiest ritual, every day with an H&H, choose a hug or a handshake. But we'd walk in and she'd always give me a compliment, but it was never for my red shoes or my pigtails. It was, thank you for being kind yesterday, Michelle.
Yes.
And her discipline was so moral. Anything that did something wrong, was that helpful or hurtful? So what are you going to do to make it helpful?
Wow.
25 years later, I still remember that. I went to a high school reunion and 6 of the kids from her class were there. We all remembered, was that helpful or hurtful? We do too much sometimes and fail to see that simple rituals over and over again can really make a difference, particularly at a time when our kids need predictability.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. Well, there's a lot of work to be done, and this could be overwhelming for school leaders to think about how do I begin to address this important issue of thriving over striving, right? To make that change.
Yeah.
It's a mindset change. It's an actions change. Is there one thing you would suggest
Yes,
for
I
anyone
thank you for
listening
that
tomorrow?
question because the
Yeah.
last thing we want is an overwhelmed educator again. We're all overwhelmed because we're so worried and care so much about our kids. One thing that you can give out to everyone, Jen, is the list of the 7 assets, but also the 21 skills.
Mm,
Each one of those, I chose the 21 skills are the ones that are teachable. Now, what do you do with them? You don't teach them all. The first thing we overlook is which one are we already doing?
mm,
Start circling the ones you already do, and then go into some serious little conversations, or maybe put those on big sheets of paper on your faculty room with hot dot stickers. Which ones do our kids need? Spend a week and just look at where the hot dot stickers are lying. And I'm telling you, they're all going to show up at the same thing because all teachers are saying it's there. That's what they need. So let's start with that skill. It's buy-in from your staff. They know their students better. You don't need fancy dancy, exorbitant, pricey assessments. Ask around, what are you seeing? What do the students need? And then you can zero in because Thrivers will have all of the ways to teach the skill. But the big thing we do is do too much, then we get overwhelmed.
mm. Well, I love that. It's a great place to start and a great place for us to end. So I love this idea of the 7 assets and 21 skills. Could you tell everyone where to find that, where to find you, where to find other books or other free downloads if they're interested?
Thank you. Well, my name's Michelle Borba. The most important thing you need to know is I'm a 1L Michelle, and Borba rhymes with Zorba. So all you have to do is go to michelleborba.com. There's dozens of assets. There's also videos. You can watch 3-minute videos to show your staff members. There's book club guides for parents, book club guides for teachers, all different kinds. Find what resonates with you and your staff and start just the little baby step in. It's just getting your foot in the door. That's it. And just keep going until you realize this is what our kids need. We really need to generate thrivers.
This is so deeply needed and so deeply practical. I'm sorry I kept you longer than I intended, but I really think this is such important work. So thank you so much, Michelle, for your time. This is Dr. Michelle Borba, Thrivers, the surprising reasons why some kids struggle and others shine. So thank you, and I hope to talk to you again.
Oh, me too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.